If you're looking for a good, rock-solid CNC router for hobby or CNC business, then this video is for you. This is a deep dive review of the Altmill CNC router, a machine that delivers impressive performance at a very surprising price.
idcwoodcraft.com.
I'm Garrett Fromme, a CNC router expert, and in this video, you and I are going to be doing a deep dive review into the Altmill CNC router. By the time you're done with this video, you're going to know everything there is to know about the Altmill CNC router and more. Maybe by the time you're done with this video, you'll have found the CNC machine for you. At the very least, you're going to have all the information you need to know to make a very informed decision. I just want to let you know how we're going to work through this video. First of all, I want to introduce to you who I am as a CNC expert, and then we are going to get into an overview of the Altmill CNC router. I'll discuss my first impressions of this machine when I received the packaging, the assembly, and then we're going to get into the important stuff that you need to know about CNC routers anyway, all the key features of the machine. And then we're going to take it for a test drive. Yeah, you got to see how a CNC router carves. So we're going to carve a very cool project and see how this thing rocks and rolls. When we're done with that, I'll talk about the pros and cons and answer some common questions I get about the Altmill CNC router. I'll give you my final thoughts, and then we'll talk about what you need when you order your Altmill. Now, I just want to make a point before we begin that down below in the description of this video is important information for you. You'll want to go down there a little bit later. I will remind you about that, but I just want to make a note now that you definitely want to see the description of this video. Now, you may notice that this video is a little long, and that's because not only are we going deep into the Altmill CNC router, I'm going to be teaching you about various things about CNC routers that you need to be looking for, especially if you're shopping for the first time for a CNC. So this is not just a review, it is a lesson as well. So before we get into the Altmill review, I just want to give you a brief introduction to who I am, and then we're going to dive right into this machine, and you're going to learn a ton about it and about CNC routers. My name is Garrett Fromme. I am the founder and CEO of IDC Woodcraft. IDC Woodcraft provides premium CNC router bits to amazing creators like you to make those amazing projects that you're going to be carving on your CNC router. My first 20 years in my career was spent as a journeyman CNC machinist, so I've got a ton of experience with CNC machines. My second 20 was spent as an engineer, and I spent 10 years as a volunteer firefighter and EMT. I am a father of one daughter and 4 amazing grandkids. Would have been 5, but we lost one of them. And I also lost my wife, Barbara, some time ago to cancer. Of course, losing my wife to cancer was a very difficult time. I felt lost for a very long time, and I don't wish it on anybody. Also, my niece, Isabel, what you see right here, when she was 6 years old, was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor, and she was sent to St. Jude Hospital, the Children's Research Hospital, to treat her, and they saved her, of course. As you can see here, she's a beautiful 22-year-old woman. And because of things like that, me, IDC Woodcraft, we regularly donate to organizations like St. Jude to help families who have had tragedy in their life. Now, I want to share with you a little bit about why I got into CNC routers. Like most of us, we end up retiring at some point. And if you're like me, I was looking forward to retirement, like it was going to be this big, long vacation, but it didn't quite work out that way because when I retired, I kind of felt lost, listless. Something was missing. Right? I got out of the workforce and nobody needed me anymore. So it was this emptiness inside that I couldn't really explain to anybody. And I didn't know how to fill that up, but I knew that there was something in my heart that was calling me to do something, especially since I retired. I became aware that my clock was ticking. There was going to be an end, and I wanted to be or have something that would leave a legacy, right? And I found CNC routers, and that turned out to be an amazing thing to satisfy that creative side, pull out that thing inside of me, and of course, leave a legacy. And I get to teach my grandkids about this stuff too, so it's really good that way. And so it's very fulfilling and rewarding, and that's something, if you haven't gotten into CNC routers before, I think you're going to really enjoy it. All right, with that, let's talk about the Altmill. We're going to start right at the top, the bird's eye view of the machine, and we're going to get down into the machine, the features, stuff you need to know about. The Altmill is a freestanding CNC router. It comes with its own legs. You can put it wherever you want to put it. It's made by a company called Sienci Labs. The machine is a ball screw driven closed loop machine. Now, if you don't know what that means, I will explain that to you later, but suffice it to say, these are two characteristics you want to look for in your CNC router. The machine has a cutting area of 49 inches by 49 inches, just over 4 foot by 4 foot. So in one pass, you can cut a half a sheet of plywood, but it has pass-through capability so that if you are cutting something bigger, you can cut that on the same sheet, slide it down, and start working on the rest of the sheet. It has a 5-inch Z clearance, which means you can carve pretty thick slabs. Now, this machine falls into this category of kind of a hybrid CNC router. And what that means is there are 4 classifications of CNC routers. You have your desktop version CNC router, which is something you can put in your closet and bring out and sit on your kitchen counter, carve something, and then put it back in the closet. Then you have your benchtop CNC router, kind of like the Longmill CNC router that you see here. This is a machine that I've had before I got the Altmill. This is one that's considered what we call a hobby machine. Now, the next one is a pro level machine. Pro machines are welded machines, they're rock solid machines, they're meant for production. And of course there's industrial level. But the pro level, hobby level machine, this is where the Altmill comes into play and is very interesting. Because of the features that it has, it is good for hobby, but it's very capable of being a home shop business machine. You can do production on this thing. So I'll explain that as we go along in the key features, but I just wanted to point that out. The other interesting thing is, as we're crossing into pro machines, which can cost anywhere from $10,000 on up, the price point on this one, phenomenal. I mean, totally blew me away when I was researching CNC routers. It's going to really surprise you as to where this thing sits in its price point. We'll get back to that one later. Now, the Altmill CNC router is what we call a kit machine. In other words, you put it together, but it's kind of fun to put stuff like that together. The first thing you'll notice is the size of it. So you need to have a fairly large area to assemble it. And it'll take you about 5 to 6 hours to put this thing together. The instructions with it were done so well that my grandkids could have put this thing together. In fact, I'm kind of bummed that I didn't have them with me to do it. So if when you get your Altmill CNC router, it'd be a fun little project to do with your grandkids if you have some. So when you receive your Altmill CNC router, it comes pre-assembled in many ways in the important elements. For example, the gantry here, this whole thing that goes all the way across, is all pre-assembled, as well as what we call a Z carriage. It's the part that holds the spindle that's going to be carving your amazing projects, and of course the side rails are all put together. You get all the hardware that you need, obviously, plus extras, and the tools that you need to put this thing together as well. When it comes to CNC routers, I want you to remember, it's an investment in a piece of equipment that's going to last you for years to come. So what you're looking for is that reliability and that rock solidness in a CNC router, whatever you decide to get. If you're going to be making stuff for family, for friends, you're going to start a CNC business, one way or the other, you want to make sure that, number one, you have the flexibility, most importantly, in the size. Sometimes we think we want to make small stuff, but you'll find as time rolls on, you want to have the capability to make big things, like American flags for your military friend or something like that. But the biggest thing is you want that thing to be lasting for years, a good, solid machine. So that's what you want to shop for. All right, we're going to talk about the features. We're going to dive into this machine even deeper so you understand what this machine is all about. One of the things that surprised me when I first got into this machine and started to pull parts out of the box and getting it assembled was the actual construction of the Altmill, and particularly of the gantry, which is this whole piece going all the way across. When it comes to CNC routers, one of the most important things is the construction. You see, when you carve on a machine, that carving tool is going through and doing work. And if the machine is not built to good, solid, high tolerances and a good, stocky build, what can happen is that carving, it can start causing vibration in the tool. And what happens from that is the cuts will not look very good. They won't be very clean. You'll get some chatter marks in the cut, and you have to sand that out by hand. So you really want to pay attention to the build of the machine so that you don't get that rigidity issue where you get the sloppiness, because that will save you a ton of work by hand afterwards that the machine should have done anyway. Now, being a mechanical engineer for 20 years, I could see it immediately, and I want to show you exactly what I see in this that really surprised me. So we're going to take a look at the back side of the gantry, but first I want to get the Z-axis out of the way, so we're going to move it over. Oh, that runs so smoothly. Looking at this gantry, it's extruded aluminum. It's 6 inches tall by 3.5 inches wide, and the thickness of this extrusion is about 3/4 of an inch. So it's a really beefy bridge that's going all the way across here. That was very surprising. You don't find that much girth in that many CNC routers. The other part of the construction of the gantry that surprised me was the beefiness of the brackets that I'm holding the gantry to the rest of the machine. So I am going to move this thing forward so we can take a closer look at it. There we go. Okay, so first of all, these are solid steel. And you can see they're about 5/8 of an inch thick. And when we look at the side, there's just a lot of steel here. It's running on 2 linear bearings, which I'll explain in just a little bit. And of course, you got your ball screw here, and it's bolted rock solid up to the gantry up here. Right off the bat, I was really impressed with how this thing was built. So the rock solid here, we have extruded bars on both sides here. And then we come to the framing of the machine, the Y rails that we'll call. These are also quite stocky as well. Not as stocky as the gantry, they don't need to be. The gantry is the part that's way in the middle where all the vibration can actually take place. And these guys are attached in many different places, so we are good there. It's really a rock solid machine that I was really surprised at how this thing is built. So it gets an A+ for me on that. So what this all means is with the stockiness of the gantry, the beefiness of the brackets, how everything's tied to the rest of the machine and the framing of the machine, this whole rigidity thing works out like this. The cutting tool is working in something, and cutting tools are just going to have that vibration tendency, but that gets passed into the spindle throughout the gantry and distributes throughout the machine, and it never comes back to the cut. And that's what leaves your cuts looking good and not getting chatter. And this is why this is such a big deal to me and why it needs to be a big deal to you. So that is why this floored me when I saw this construction. Now we're going to talk about the motion system and the drive system of the Altmill CNC router. First, we're going to cover the motion system. So what is the motion system? Basically, it's the elements that the machine rides on as it moves around that keeps it precise and makes it come back to wherever you need it to come back to. But first, in order to get a better camera angle, I need to move this forward, and it's actually a good time to show you how fast this machine moves. I was actually very pleasantly surprised at this because when it comes to CNC routers, we like speed. So I'm going to move this whole assembly forward. Watch this. Bam, that's it. All the moving components of the Altmill ride on linear bearings. If you take a look right here, you'll see 2 steel rails that go along like this. And then there are 2 blocks right in here. These are bearings that ride on these rails. Now those are precision ground rails. They're used all over the place in industry and on CNC routers in many, many cases. The thing with the Altmill is it has 2 of them and they are spread wide apart on the gantry. And then on the Z carriage, the part that moves the spindle up and down, you'll see there's 2 here as well. And there are 4 bearings, 2 per rail, just like on the X gantry, there are 2 bearings per rail. So that helps keep everything very, very square. The gantry has a single linear rail on each side with 2 bearings, and these bearings have a nice spread to keep the machine nice and secure throughout all of its movement. So this type of system is very common in many of the CNC routers of this caliber, and it's a very good system to use. extremely accurate. Now let's talk about the drive system of the Altmill. The Altmill CNC router uses a ball screw as the element that's actually making the components move around on the machine. Now, before I get into why the ball screw is the type of drive that you want on your CNC router, I'm going to explain to you the 3 different types of drive systems so that you do understand why this is what you want on your machine. The 3 types of drive systems are a belt drive, a screw drive, and a rack and pinion. The rack and pinion is basically a gear wheel and a gear rail that ride against each other, just like you're seeing right here in this picture. And this is usually found on more industrial machines that need a lot of robust power behind them. But they do have an inherent flaw, and that is that you can get something called back driving. Basically, as the machine is moving in a direction doing its work, the cutting tool that's actually doing the work can actually force the machine to go in a different direction. That's called back driving, simply because there's a wheel rolling on a gear. So it doesn't quite have that resistance to prevent the back driving. The belt drive is another one that's commonly used on CNC routers, generally on what we call benchtop CNC routers. Remember, I told you this was a bit of a hybrid between your hobby machine and your pro machine. Well, benchtops are classified clearly as hobby machines, and many of them have these belts on them. And basically what it is, it's a timing belt that the motor drives along to move the machine back and forth. The thing with belts are they need to be set at a specific tension, and if they're too loose, you can actually have belt skipping, and that would ruin your project right in the middle of the carve, and belts are prone to wear over time. However, they have been used in many machines for a long time, not a bad resource. The reason why belts have been used is because they're very inexpensive. However, with a screw drive, that is going to prevent back driving, but you also won't have the skipping that you can potentially have with a belt. So there's 2 types of screw drive. There's a lead screw and there's a ball screw. The ball screw is actually the most accurate. So if we come into here, we're going to take a look at this screw here, and it has a very interesting shape. It's kind of just like that, and the bearing block right back in here that rides on, there's a bunch of ball bearings in there, so when this spins, it's constantly running on these ball bearings. The benefit to that is that it's a very low friction type of thing. It resists back driving because it requires you to really put a lot of force to get that screw turning in the opposite direction, and it's relatively low maintenance. So the Altmill uses 16mm ball screws, so basically it's about 5/8 of an inch in diameter along the x-axis, which is going across, and on the y-axis, which is back and forth. It uses a 12mm ball screw for the z-axis going up and down. Ball screws are really what you want to get to if you can get that on your CNC router. So what makes these screws turn are stepper motors. And stepper motors are very common on CNC routers. They are the workhorse that makes CNC routers move around. The Altmill uses what we call NEMA 23 stepper motors. There's NEMA 17s, little tiny ones. There's NEMA 23s, which is what's here. There's NEMA 34s, and that just has to do with the size of the armature. The stepper motors, here is the one for the Z, and that moves it up and down. And then we have the one for the X, and you'll notice it's pretty wide. And then we have 2 in the back for the Y motion. We have to have screws on both sides to move the machine back and forth. You'll see some CNC routers only have 1 Y motor that's actually in the middle and it's driving the gantry like that. I don't like to see that. I like to see 2 stepper motors on each side for the Y. That is something that you want to look for because you'll have the power drive on both sides. It's exactly what you want. Now, there's a couple of advantages to the stepper motors that Sienci Labs has used for the Altmill. The first one is these are much longer than your traditional stepper motors. Traditionally, the NEMA 23 stepper motors are about that long, but you see these are quite a bit longer. And the reason for that is they wanted more torque, so you have more windings in the motor. But the other benefit, if you remember, I talked about this being a closed loop CNC router. Now, here's what that means. and it's a big deal. A CNC router that is open loop, what is happening is the computer is sending to the machine the code that makes it move around and carve your amazing project. That's something we call G code, something you don't have to know about or learn the ins and outs of G code, but you need to know what it is. It's basically the code, that's the language that the machine understands. When the machine sends the G code to an open loop machine, the machine's going to move around, it's going to carve. Now, if something happens with the machine, say you've got a belt drive machine and it skips a belt, now the machine is out of position from where it's supposed to be, the computer doesn't know that. And it's still feeding this motion data to the machine, yet the machine has lost its position. Basically, the computer is saying, you're still moving, you're still exactly where I think you need to be, but in reality, it's not. What is going on here? It's an open loop system. The communication is one way from the computer to the machine. The big benefit on the Altmill CNC router is each one of these stepper motors is closed loop. So what it's doing, it's communicating back to the computer saying, okay, I'm here. And then the computer sends the next motion signal. So it's talking back and forth. So if the position is lost, the whole system is going to stop so it doesn't ruin your project. So a closed loop system is something that's really important if you want to make sure the CNC router is going to stop if something goes wrong. And you want to have this kind of thing, especially if you're considering starting a CNC business, because you don't want to scrap out projects. Hey, I just wanted to stop for a moment because you and I, we've been hanging out for about 20 minutes now, and we still have another 40-ish minutes to go as we dive deeper into this Altmill CNC router. There's a lot to teach you about the machine and about CNC routers, so I hope you're getting something out of this, and if you are at this point, maybe give me a thumbs up down below, hitting that little like button. And this is just a quick reminder, down below in the description of the video, there is information that you will want to see. I'll remind you about that again later on. So we still have some time, just keep hanging out, and let's get back to the Altmill CNC router. Now the other thing that the Altmill comes with is these little sensors here. These are what we call homing sensors. And there's one here for the x-axis, there's one in the z-axis, and there are two in the back on each side for the y-axis. And what that does is when you turn the CNC router on, you send it to machine home. The advantage of having a home position on a machine is that you always have a reference point that you can do your work from. Not all CNC routers have the homing sequence in it. This one does. If you are going to be running a business, you're thinking about starting a CNC business, selling projects, then this is a really, really good feature to have. And here's the way it works. I've got the machine turned on, it's plugged in, ready to go, and the first thing I'm going to do is send it to its home position. So I click the button and it starts to move back, and what it's doing is going to the sensors, and when it reaches the sensors, it does like what we call micro adjustment to get itself into an exact position. And once it comes back to the two sensors in the back, then it is going to know that it is completely in the home position. And then I can do something called set work offsets. So I can do other things. Again, I'm not going to explain that here, but if you're thinking of starting a CNC business, this is a big, big thing that you want to have. So it comes with that. The big thing I like about how they defaulted this machine is they made the home position in the back left corner, whereas most companies, when they build the machines, they make the home position in the front left corner. So then you have to move everything back out of your way whenever you're doing your projects. So nice little thoughtful perk that they added into this. So there you have it with that. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple of the other things that come with the machine here. Deliver it with an e-stop. You got the brains and the power supply. Now this here is called the super longboard. The super longboard is the brains of the CNC router. It is what's communicating back and forth to the computer and to the machine. And the thing with the super longboard is it's a very reasonably priced computer circuit board, basically, that has a lot of additional features that you can add into the Altmill. For example, what we call a tool changer or an ATC. And you can add other things into it too. It's a very flexible type of tool. There'll be lots of little plugins that you can bring into it. but we won't get into that now. Just know that you get the super long board, and that gives you a lot more flexibility for other things you want to add to the machine. Now with the Altmill, you naturally have to interact with it. You have to be able to tell it to move around manually and to run those amazing projects that you're going to be designing. So how do you do that? Well, you do it through your control software. The control software is basically your interface to make the machine do what you want it to do. And that software is called Genter. Now, if you look on my computer screen right here, you've got a nice, easy layout here. And this is what runs the Altmill CNC router. I can manually make it move around. I'm going to push a button, make it move in any direction I want to. I can load up my, what we call a tool path, and double click that. And there's the tool path. If I told the CNC router to start moving around or tell it to run that tool path, it's going to start moving around and doing what it's supposed to do. Now, I have plenty of videos on this channel that teach you not only about CNC routers, but specifically about the Genter software. So if you decide to get the Altmill, you definitely want to subscribe to the channel to learn how to use this software. Now, Sienci Labs, the company that has designed the Altmill, is coming out with, and I will get as soon as it's released, is a mounted touchscreen right here where that Genter software is going to be installed. It'll make it much easier for you as the user to control your machine and see what it's doing and tell it to do what you want it to do. Now, like I said, down in the description is a bunch of information. There's also a download that has this information in it of the extra things that you're going to want to get with your machine. I'll get more into that in a little while, but that's how you move your machine around. And now we need to get into actually running a project on this machine to actually see how this thing runs. And then we're going to wrap up, talk about the pros and cons and my final thoughts on the machine and who should get the machine, if you should consider it or not. So let's get into this test carve. Can't wait. This is the moment we've been waiting for to watch the Altmill actually carve a project. Now, I want to just admit to you, this is the very first official project I have done on this machine. So we get to see how fast this thing runs together. So first of all, I just want to let you know about this project that I'm making. You see that it is a pretty large board. It's 31 wide by 39 tall. And the first thing I want to mention about this is a project that someone has commissioned me to do, and I'm going to charge them $1,000 for this project. It is an award board, and this is one of the reasons why I say you really want to think ahead of time as far as you're getting your CNC router, because you never know what's coming down the pike. Had I gone with my very first CNC router or second CNC router and stopped there, I never would have been able to do a project like this where I could make that kind of green because the machines just weren't big enough. So I just want to show you what we're making. Come on over here and you can see it right here. This is someone who's in my entrepreneurs group, and this guy, he wants this board for his wall. It's what we call a vision board, so that it's just something he wants to keep him reminded of where he wants to go with his business. All right, so we've got this. I've got it held down in 6 different places. Here's the 2 bits that we are going to be running. One is the 1/8 downcut end mill. It's a 1/4 inch shank bit. This is what we call the QD series from IDC Woodcraft, where it has a 1/4 inch shank and then a 1/8 cut. This is available at IDC Woodcraft. It's actually a new bit that we just released. The benefit with this is that you don't have to use a reducing collet. You can stay with your 1/4 inch collet in your machine and just swap out with your 1/4 inch. The second one we're going to do is a 90-degree V-bit, engraving bit, and it looks like this. This is a bladed style bit. It leaves very, very clean cuts on the project. So these are both available at IDC Woodcraft. I'll link them down below in the description. There's one other thing I want to point out on this project before we actually start. A lot of people ask me about this when I do projects. You'll notice that there's this like bluish stuff on the project here. So what this is, it's called aura mask. And it is this stuff right here. And it's a masking that we actually put on the project. It's adhesive backed material, just like that. And that will get put down there. And when we run that, what that enables us to do is to carve out the lettering like what I'm going to do here, and then paint all that area, and then we can peel the masking away and it'll protect all the black paint that's on there. So first thing we got to do though is set the router bit in here. So you're going to get a little bit of lesson of how to set up your tooling on your CNC router. One of the things that when you get your Altmill CNC router is you'll also need to get the touch probe. I'll have the link down below. It's going to tell you everything you need to get with your Altmill if you decide to get it. So we're going to set this bit up and zero it out, and then I'm going to stand on this machine when it starts to carve. So you can see how strong this machine really is. Rigidity, as I've said before, is super, super important, and you want to make sure whatever CNC router you get is rigid. We're going to start off with the 1/8 down cutter QD bit, and you always, a little tip for you, if you're just getting into CNC routing, you always want to take your collet off and make sure there's no sawdust in there. So we're going to get that sawdust out of there. It's actually already clean. That was good. And load that up, and we want to make sure that shank is up there far enough. When you put a tool in your CNC router, you always want to make sure that you are chucked almost down to the flute or the change in direction there. So we're going to put that in there just like that. And then we'll tighten things down. Now you'll get all the tools you need to do this from Sienci Labs when you order your Altmill. And when you tighten bits down, you don't need to be super, super tight. You just need to make sure that you get that feel as you're tightening it up, that it's nice and snug. All right, and then we're going to use the touch probe. And this is how this guy works. It's got a little plate that nests on the corner of the project, and a little magnet that goes right there. And that's going to create a closed loop when this bit touches this plate, and that'll tell the software to set the bit to a 0 point. So we're going to bring that over. You never have the plate underneath you when you're bringing your bit into position, because I've seen it too many times. People will run right into it. Just a little more move here. Now, a little singing noise that you hear from the machine, that's pretty typical of a CNC router. Pretty cool to watch this thing zero itself out. All right, so what just happened is the software just set the 0 to the top surface and the front edge and the left edge. We're ready to go. So now we're going to start the machine, and I'm going to climb on top, and I'm going to stand on that gantry. Let's rock this out.
Hold on. Just one moment. You're going to what?
What? I'm going to stand on the machine. I told you I was going to do that.
That's what I thought I heard. You're not getting on the machine without a helmet.
Come on.
The Altmill is crazy fast. If you fall off, I'm not going to be responsible for any head injuries without a helmet.
So this is Julianne. She is the administrative coordinator for idcwoodcraft, aka Mom.
Helmet.
Now this is embarrassing. Do I have to?
It's safety first. Safety is important. You must have your goggles. Okay. If you're standing on your machine, you must have a helmet.
Standing on your machine is not something people normally do. Yes? Okay, fine. Good grief. I guess fair enough.
Now we may proceed. I'm appeased.
You gonna stand there and make sure that I'm...
I'll spot you for a minute.
Okay. All right, let's do this with the helmet on. All right, machine is firing up. Spindle's ramping up. Watch how fast this thing runs. And this bit is going at 200 inches per minute, so it's going to wrap it back to there when the spindle winds up. That's so fast. All right. All right, let's see. Can I get up there now, Mom? All right, she gave me the thumbs up. I got to make sure I get on my handholds here. Can't believe I'm standing on my CNC router. All right. baby, come on. Let's do it. So, ooh, this thing moves fast. Okay, maybe a smart move for putting a helmet on while I'm holding on this because the thing's going just like that. So I can stand on this thing all day long. This thing is just a rock solid machine. And this carve is going to be very, very cool. All right, I'm going to climb back down. And we're going to let this puppy run out, then I'm going to get to the next router bit that's going to carve the rest of this project. And normally I would have the dust shoe hooked up to this machine while it's doing this carving. It's something you normally want to do, but because we're filming this, we don't want this in the way. But I do want to make a point here that the dust boot comes with your Altmill. You don't have to add it as an add-on to your purchase like most other CNC routers companies make you do when you buy the machines. It's just part of the purchase. It's a necessary item anyway, is your dust collection. So it's nice that they add this along with it. Now it's time to change the bit and get to the fun part of this project where we're going to actually carve out the letters of this very large project. And I'm really excited to see how fast this thing actually runs. So it is really nice to have this kind of flexibility with this size machine to be able to do a project like this. And it never would have occurred to me early on that I would potentially get jobs like this when I first got into CNC. This is the beauty of CNC. You never know what kind of work is going to come to you that you can make. And this is the perfect machine to make things like American flags. All right, let's get this 90-degree V-bit installed on this thing, and let's see how this cool part carves out, and actually how fast, because that's the big thing I want to see. How fast and how clean. All right, we're going to change the bit out and get started. Okay, so I gotta say something right now. This is our first project and I'm running this really, really fast, and this is going really, really fast. It's super nice, clean cut on the Now it's cutting the letters that really count. Look how fast these things are going. Hey, I wanted to stop again. You and I, we've been together for about 40 minutes now as I am diving deep into the Altmill CNC router. We got in about another 20 minutes to go, but heck, we've been hanging around so long, we're almost starting to be buddies here. Anyway, I hope this video is giving you the information that you need to know about the Altmill CNC router and how to compare it with other CNC routers, and that you're getting the details that you need to be looking for when you're shopping for a CNC router. So if this video is giving you that kind of information, you're finding it helpful, again, take a moment to hit the thumbs up button down below. That tells me that I'm giving you good content, and you might want to consider subscribing, because this is how I dive into all the videos I create to help you become an awesome CNC router creator to make amazing projects. All right, so hit the subscribe button and let's keep going with the Altmill CNC router. All right, the project's done. Let's send the machine back to its home position. So I hit the home button and it's going to go out of the way. So very fast cutting machine here. Super clean cuts with the 90-degree bladed style bit. Now you know about the Altmill CNC router. It's built rock solid, especially this gantry. It is a ball screw machine. It's closed loop, so it knows if it's losing a position and will stop. It's running on linear bearing rails, so it stays nice and accurate. It's just got a good solid build to it and a good feel to it. Now, I want to cover the things that I think make this machine stand out for me, but we also want to cover some of the cons, because nothing's perfect. Then I want to talk about who should consider getting the Altmill CNC router over other CNC routers. And if you decide that you're going to get your Altmill, what exactly do you need to get with it? And I'll cover that stuff. And again, I want to remind you, down below in the description is going to have that information and a download with a document that covers everything that I'm talking about here and the stuff that you need to get. So don't forget, you need to get down in the description of this video so you can get that information. All right, so let's cover what makes this machine stand out for me. Number one is it comes with legs. Most CNC routers don't have legs, at least in this class. This is what I said was a hybrid pro hobby machine, which means if you just want to make hobby projects, it offers a lot of flexibility because of the size. If you want to get into a business, it's got good acceleration, which means that as the machine moves and changes direction, it's got to slow down and stop before it makes that direction change. And that means it has to decelerate and then accelerate. And so that deceleration and acceleration are really quick on the Altmill CNC router. And that really comes into play when you're doing those amazing 3D carves that most people want to do. And I'm going to guess that you want to do 3D carves as well. Another thing is this can cut your softer metals like aluminum, brass, and copper. Many people ask me, can a CNC router like this cut steel? It's generally not built for steel, as most CNC routers aren't, because steel requires a high torque motor and to have a much lower RPM than what CNC routers are designed to run at. One of the things I like is it comes with a dust boot. Most of the CNC companies that sell CNC routers, the dust boot is actually an upsell. right? Meaning you have to buy that on top of the machine. And it comes with the super longboard, which is the brains of the machine that has a lot of flexibility. You can add a tool changer to it. You can add the touch probe. And there's a lot of other things you can do with it, but I'm not going to get into that here because that's getting a little more technical, especially if you're a beginner. Don't worry about it. It's just a good board to have. And the best thing about this is the stinking price. I was blown away that this machine, get this machine costs $3,000. You add the spindle to it, it's another $500, and you add that touch screen here, it's another $400, and you're talking $4,000 for this thing. Every other CNC router in its class that has the same cutting area starts above that price. So I'm very surprised, especially for the robust build of this machine. Of course, you're gonna have to build your own spoil board. That's a gimme. You're gonna have to get what we call T-tracks. That's these little black strips that go up in here. This is where clamps ride up so you can actually clamp your project down. That information is gonna be in this download that I'm making available for you down in the description of this video. Again, go get that because that's gonna have all the information on what you need to get. Now, if you decide to add the spindle to your Altmill when you order it, the spindle is what we call an ER20 collet size. And what that means is that it accepts up to 3/8 inch tooling. So what you'll get with the spindle are 3 collets here. And one of them is the 1/8 inch collet, and it takes 1/8 inch bits, just like that. You have the 1/4 inch collet, which accepts 1/4 inch shank bits, and you have the 3/8 collet, which accepts 3/8 inch bits. So the bits I'm showing you here are actually very popular bits in the CNC community. When it comes to CNC projects and you have to remove a lot of material, that can actually take quite a bit of time, and the standard bits that you use, they're doing all that work before they actually get to the finished cuts. And so these bits, called roughing bits, are designed to remove that material really, really fast. We have the Badger, the Beast, the Ripper, the Hog. So these are bits that you may seriously want to consider if you're going to carve out bowls or some kind of pocket signs where you got to remove a lot of material. Anyway, just remember that you get this flexibility. You don't get that if you order the trim router with your Altmill. So the trim routers are strictly 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch. And they don't have near the power and the speed control and torque control that a spindle comes with. So I do recommend that you get a spindle with your Altmill. Those are all the perks that make this a good solid machine. Now, what are some of the cons on this that could be improved? Well, you can see I added shelves here. It was very nice that they had holes here so that I could create these shelves, but without these, there was a little wobble going on in the machine as it would move around. So you want to just brace that up a little bit more. Once you get that bracing in there, this thing is rock solid. Very solid machine. I've got videos also that will help you build your spoil board, get it surfaced, make sure the machine is square and set up. Again, all that information is down in the description. Now, one of the things that I ran into when I was building it was I had to actually take the bearing blocks off for the ball screws just on the side rails because there's a bolt that goes in behind it to mount the side rail to the front rail, and that required a 6mm wrench. That was not included with the machine, so you want to make sure you have a 6mm wrench. Fortunately, I had one in my toolbox. Touch probe is not included. That's something that you're going to want to get. You don't have to have it, but I suggest you get it. So those are some of the cons when it comes to the machine. Not major things to overcome by any means. So at this point, we're going to cover a few more items and then we are going to wrap up. One of the first things I want to cover are some of the common questions I get about the Altmill CNC router. And then we are going to get into who should get the Altmill, if it's something that you should consider. And then if you decide to get the Altmill CNC router, some of the other things that you're going to want to consider getting with it. Now, I'm going to provide a document, like I said before, down in the description where you can download, and then it'll have all the information in it. And then finally, I'm going to give you my final thoughts about this machine. So first of all, let's cover the common questions that people ask about this machine. One of the questions that comes up quite a bit is, basically about the size. So the Altmill CNC router is a 4x4 cutting machine, and it takes up the floor space of about 5 foot by 5 foot. So some people have asked me, due to space concerns, does it come in a 4 foot wide by 2 foot deep? At this point, Sienci Labs does not have a 4x2 Altmill CNC router. However, I think they're working on it, but at this point, I think it's still quite a ways off. So the next thing is, what's the voltage requirement? This machine is a 110 volt machine, and even with the spindle, it'll be 110 volt unless you upgrade to something like a 2.2 kilowatt water-cooled spindle, which you can do. One of the spindles would require 220 volts. You'd have to add a 220 volt single phase circuit to your shop in order to accommodate that. However, as far as amperage pull, of course, you want to check the specifications. I'll try to remember to put that down in the description of this video. And then the next one is, can it ship to anywhere? Yes, Sienci Labs ships their machines to anywhere they can in the world, so long as the country permits it. And then another question is, and it's a very common question, is how does the Altmill CNC router compare to other CNC routers in its class? So rigidity wise, the machine is totally equal as far as that goes. It's a very strong, rigid machine. You already saw that. Then one of the big things is it comes with the legs. Most CNC routers of this class, you actually have to buy the table extra. One of the other things is that it comes with the dust boot. They're an upsell. You have to add it on, and that makes the price go up. So that's kind of a big deal for me that they give you a dust boot. You just need to remember that the dust boot comes with a 4-inch hose, and if you're going to use a 2.5-inch hose, then you have to adapt it. It took a little bit for me to actually figure out how to adapt it in 2 runs to the hardware store. So you'll want a 4-inch extraction tube. Now the thing with the dust boot is it comes with the machine only if you add the spindle to your order, which I suggest you do because spindles are much better. If you order the machine without a spindle, then they won't send the dust boot along with it because they don't know what you're going to put on the machine. Now there is one other aspect of the Altmill that was a really, really nice thing to see that you don't see in other CNC routers. And it has to do with something called tram or tramming. So tram is the perpendicularity of your spindle axis relative to the work surface. And what I mean by that is when everything is together and it's running, you want the axis of the spindle to be at a perfect right angle relative to the work surface, because your router bit will be nice and flat as it's making the carve. So when it's like that, it's called in tram. But when you get your CNC router, it's rarely in tram, and you have to do the adjustments to get everything in tram. And what I mean when I say it's not in tram, or as we say in the CNC world, out of tram, let's pretend this bar is the axis of your CNC spindle here. So you want that to be perfectly 90 degrees. But if it's out of tram, it will be off at an angle like that. So the router bit will be spinning at this kind of angle, or forward, or right, or left, or a combination of the two. So whenever you put your CNC router together, you have to tram the machine. And you tram it in the X axis and you tram it in the Y axis. So when you're tramming it in the X axis, it's pretty easy to do. You simply loosen the bolts here, and then you do a little adjustment. You have something called a tramming bar, which is what this is. It'll swing around and you can check your tram. There's multiple ways. I got a video about that. I can link that down below, but you'll watch that later after you get your Altmill. Anyway, this is really easy. It's a challenge when it comes to doing the back and forth tram. Now, in virtually every CNC router, in order to set this tram, this back and forth type of tram, what you normally have to do is loosen the bolts that are holding your spindle bracket, this guy right here. And you loosen them up and you'll put a shim either at the bottom of the bracket or at the top of the bracket, depending on which way your machine is out of tram. Then you tighten everything down, you recheck the tram, and if it's not right, then you got to go back and put more shims in, do more adjustments, and it's a real pain to set that type of tram. And virtually every CNC router requires you to do that. Here's the ingenious little solution that the guys that made the Altmill came up with that makes this tramming so much better. If you look right here on the side bracket, you're going to see these screws, and on this one you're going to see this little nut here. What this is, it's like an eccentric spacer. And what you do is loosen the bolts that are holding the gantry in place to the brackets, and then start to adjust this spacer and use your tramming bar to check the tram. Again, I've got a video about that. Don't worry about the tramming until you get your Altmill. But you turn this ever so slightly, and what it does is it adjusts the entire assembly back and forth that way. Again, this is very exaggerated. Basically, it'll move your axis back and forth like that until you get it flat, and all you have to do is just retighten things. And it's really much, much faster doing it this way than it is the traditional way with virtually every other CNC router out there. So brilliant little thing that the guys at Sienci Labs came up with for this machine. So one of the other benefits to the Altmill is the Genter interface. It's very user-friendly, not very complicated to use at all. So if you're a brand new beginner, this is really an easy platform to work with. I've got a video that tells you how to work with the Genter software, and you'll find that with some of the other controls and some of the other CNC routers in this class, the controls are actually quite a bit more complicated, and there's not a lot of resource to teach you how to use those controllers. So that's one reason you might want to subscribe to the channel, because I've got videos that explain all this stuff for you as a brand new person. One of the other things that was, when they designed this machine, they really focused on was the acceleration and deceleration of the machine. So one of the things that actually takes a lot of time on CNC routers is when the machine changes its direction during a carve. And especially when it comes to those 3D carves that you're going to want to be doing, the machine has to move into position and then stop or slow down or decelerate, and then start change direction, or as it changes direction, it has to re-accelerate. And that is what takes a lot of time on the 3D carves. So Sienci Labs paid a lot of attention to that deceleration and acceleration to really cut down on the carve time. And this is particularly important when it comes to those 3D carves that you are definitely going to be doing. Another common question that I get from a lot of people, and something that you're going to be interested in, is does the Altmill support a fourth axis? In other words, does it support a rotary along with its X, Y, and Z motions? Yes, it does. The control board actually has an extra port in it for your rotary on the machine, or for a fourth axis. And as a matter of fact, Sienci Labs actually has a rotary for the Altmill or for any of their machines called the Vortex. So I have not installed mine yet, but you can see here in this video here of what the rotary does. And the good thing is, yes, you can have the rotary installed on your machine as well and not have to mess with anything, because the machine is all wired up and ready to go for a fourth axis. So I will link that down below as well, and it'll be in the document that I'm giving to you that's going to show you all about the Altmill. Finally, the super longboard, the actual brains of the machine right here. This is significantly less expensive than some of the other controllers that are on some of the other CNC machines, and that keeps the price down. On top of that, it's an extremely flexible controller. As time goes on, there will be a lot of features that can be added to it. We're not going to cover that. Just suffice it to say, the controller is a good controller, and it's going to give you a lot of flexibility in the future. So these are the answers to the most common questions that I get for this Altmill CNC router. So now what we're going to cover is who should buy the Altmill. Should you consider this machine or some other smaller machine? Just before we get into who should buy the Altmill CNC router, I do want to let you know that down in the description of this video, I have several free resources to you that are going to really help you out on your CNC journey. Number one is when you put your CNC router together, there are certain things you want to make sure that your CNC router is set up to do, or is set up properly. Number one is you want to make sure that it actually runs square and that the framing is set up square. And there's quite a few other things that you want to check as you're building and after you build your machine, like a reminder to tighten all the bolts and make sure everything's lubricated. So one of the resources that I'm going to give you is the new CNC router assembly checklist. Now what this checklist is all the things you need to check as you're assembling your CNC router. And so as you're doing it, you check them off, and once you're at the bottom, your CNC router is ready to go. This checklist has instructions and pictures of everything you need to do so that you really understand this assembling your machine, why it's so important. The next thing I'm going to give you, if you decide to get the Altmill CNC router, I've got a break-in cycle and a squareness check set of instructions for you. So what I mean by a break-in cycle is whenever you get a new machine, this is what we did in my professional career as a CNC machinist. Whenever we got a new machine, we always broke the machine in first because you want to make sure it settles into all its motions and the frame settles in and what have you. So this is a free break-in cycle program and a squareness checking program. This is going to make sure that your Altmill is square before you start running things, and it runs square. The thing is, if the machine is not running square, your projects are going to be out of square. And if you're doing things like double-sided projects, then that can be an issue. So you can see this is a full-blown document as well, and you will get G-code with it for both of the break-in cycle and the square checking. So everything's provided for you. You don't have to do anything with it. What else am I going to give you? The surfacing program. So all CNC routers have to be surfaced before you ever run anything. And so what I've done is, since I actually surfaced mine, I just put all the files together and I'm making them available to you. And there's an entire set of instructions here that will tell you exactly how to surface your Altmill and just the whole procedure. The next thing I'm going to give you is a CNC router project setup checklist. Now this is something that's really important. Every time you set a project up on your CNC router, there are a lot of little steps that you have to do. And if you miss one of those steps, you can start your CNC router and you may run into a problem right in the middle of the carve because you missed one of those steps. Right here is the checklist. You can see there are a lot of steps that are involved in literally just taking your piece of material and setting it on your machine. There are lots of little micro steps, and we just take it for granted, but one missed step and you could ruin your project. So I'm giving you that as well as part of the free downloads I'm giving you. Again, the links will be down below. So make sure you go down in the description of this video and download those free resources. They will help you in your CNC journey, especially if you haven't purchased a CNC machine before. All right, so let's talk about who should consider getting the Altmill CNC router. Number one is if price has been a concern. You're pricing out some of the machines this size, you want them, yet you're still seeing them at $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. The Altmill CNC router, very surprisingly for its build, is a $3,000 machine. That's minus the spindle. So you can put a trim router in there, like I said before, and not have to spend $500 for the spindle upgrade. That's up to you. The trim router will work just fine. However, you will definitely want to upgrade to a spindle. I've talked about that in other videos. So that's the first thing. The cost of the machine relative to other CNC routers, this one just takes the cake. The next thing is if you are looking for better than a hobby machine. Most of the CNC routers out there for the home shops are considered hobby level machines. And they're good machines, but sometimes they're not built up to a point of where if you want to do a business or you're considering making some money with your CNC router, with your Altmill or whatever else you get, you want to make sure that you get a good machine that's going to last you for a long time. That's why that rigidity is so important. The ball screw drive is so important. The linear drives are so important, and a good control, and of course, the customer support. So the Sienci Labs that makes this machine, excellent customer support. Basically, if you want to make sure you got a rock solid machine, then this is one that you seriously might want to consider. And again, business, you don't want to get a small machine if you're thinking about making some money with your CNC router. You really want to make sure you get a machine that you know is going to last for a long, long time. The next thing, of course, is if you have the space. You need a good 5 foot by 5 foot floor space to have this machine in your shop. If they come out with a 4x2, then I will link that below in the description. However, I would suggest that you consider getting a 4x4. As you can see here, it just gives you a lot of working space to create whatever you want to create. And finally is the idea of flexibility. A lot of times when we get a CNC router or we're thinking about getting one, we really don't think about the projects that we want to make with them. This machine will make anything from coasters to any 4 foot by 4 foot. You saw that big project that I made while I was standing on the machine, that award for my friend Tiziano. This machine can cover that large area. So if you get a project request like that, you're covered. Whereas if you have a little tiny machine or even this space, you're going to find that it's kind of limiting. That's why a lot of people end up upgrading their CNC routers anyway. Even though they bought one, they just didn't anticipate the future projects they might be making. Another one is this flag that is in front of a friend of mine's house. That was made on a CNC router. It's big, it's bold, it can be seen. A project like a flag, if you make a flag this big, it just doesn't stand out. And those are the proud and tall projects that need to be big. So that's another concern. Again, if you want the flexibility for future projects, often we don't always make really big projects, but this is going to give you that opportunity to not just make large projects, but multiple projects at one time, especially when you start making projects that you're going to sell on your CNC router. At the end of the day, who should buy this machine? If you're concerned about price, it's an excellent price point. It gives you all the flexibility you want. It's a rock solid machine. It's a good CNC business starter machine. That's who should buy this CNC router. So if you fit in this class, this machine is probably for you. I'm going to tell you my final thoughts in a story. I have been through 4 CNC routers. I have spent $18,000 on CNC routers. I bought a small one first. It was a 24 by 24, and I thought that was plenty big. But I very quickly found out that not only was that a very limiting size, the machine was not very strong or rigid. So I upgraded to a 30 by 30 machine. And it was much better machine, metal frame machine. The previous one was a wood frame machine. That machine was great, but it still was limiting. Then I upgraded to the long mill machine, which if you turn the camera around, you will see right there, which is a 30 by 48. So my 30 by 30 was a long mill, and then this has been upgraded to a 48 wide machine by 32 tall. So it has a really good cutting area. Then I went to a Phantom Pro machine, as you can see in this picture here. And besides, it's a $12,000 machine. I have the same cutting area on the Altmill CNC router for $3,500, right? So that's my final thought is buy your last machine first. If you can do a machine this size, you're going to find that it's going to last you for years to come and you will not need to upgrade. Those are my final thoughts on the Altmill CNC router. I think it's a rock solid machine. It's built to last. It's very strong. As you saw, I was standing on top of it, and the price point is phenomenal for this machine, for this size of machine, especially relative to other machines of this size. So make sure you go down in the description of this video. There's a link for the Altmill down there, and make sure you get these free resources. They are going to help you out a ton. If you have any questions about the Altmill CNC router, then of course you can ask them down in the comment section of this video, or you can email me, Garrett, at idcwoodcraft.com, and I will be glad to answer your questions. Now make sure that you take a minute to give a thumbs up on the channel and also subscribe to the channel. The videos I have on this channel teach you about CNC designing. It teaches you all about your CNC router, setting up your carves, processing them all the way through, and the finish work, and lots of other stuff. And I teach in a way for beginners like you to understand. So make sure you subscribe. Now there's one more quick thing that you and I need to cover before we part ways. And you go buy your Altmill CNC router or whatever CNC router that you decide to get. And it's this very important point. It doesn't matter what CNC machine you get. Well, that's not really true because not all CNC machines are made alike. You want to make sure you get a good rigid machine. But this point I want to make with you. The CNC machine does the moving. It holds the router bit and it moves around. But at the end of the day, it's the router bit that does the carving. You need to get a set of router bits that's going to cover some of the projects that you're going to be designing, especially if you're brand new. Now, getting CNC router bits can be quite confusing, trying to figure out what you need. So I've got that one covered for you. At idcwoodcraft.com, I put together a set of router bits. I call it the only truly complete starter set of CNC bits. because it really has everything you need to do about 99% of your projects. This kit that I have available to you also gives you 7 starter projects with instructions, the files and everything, so you can get started the right way with your CNC router with the right kind of guidance. Make sure you go check out that starter set from idcwoodcraft.com. I'll put a link down below in the description for that as well. Make sure you get everything else that I've talked about, your guides, and check the Altmill. There's a link down below in the description for that as well. With that, if this video has been helpful, then please give me a thumbs up and of course comment down below. And when you order your Altmill or whatever else you get, then make sure you send me a message because I'm going to do the happy dance for you. idcwoodcraft.com